I stood there in my Sunday best, watching my own flesh and blood lock me out like yesterday's trash. Little did they know, yesterday's trash would soon be worth $8 million. If you're reading this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I'm going to tell you how a 60-year-old woman went from homeless to owning the most expensive mansion in Emerald Hills. Because revenge, my dear, isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served with a side of pure, unadulterated success. My name is Rose Miller, and I've learned that the only thing better than proving others wrong is making them regret ever doubting you. And my son Howard and his wife Daisy gave me more than enough opportunity. It was October 15, 2012, when my world fell apart. I'd been living with Howard and Daisy for 3 months after my husband passed away. I helped with their 2 young children while I planned my next steps. The life insurance money wasn't much, and I thought family was supposed to help each other through tough times. "Mom, we need to talk," Howard said that morning. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Daisy stood behind him, arms crossed, with that smug look I'd come to hate. At 30, she possessed a sharp beauty that cut people when they got too close. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, placing my coffee cup on their granite countertop. A countertop I'd helped finance with my pension checks just last year. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," Daisy announced, stepping forward as if the conversation belonged to her, which it seemed it did. "You're too set in your ways, Rose. The kids are confused about who's in charge." I looked at Howard, waiting for him to defend me, for him to remember that I was his mother, who'd raised him alone after his father left when he was 8. Instead, he avoided my gaze, as if I were a stranger begging for change. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice smaller than intended. "That's not our problem anymore," Daisy retorted with a shrug that would haunt me for years. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out yourself." 20 minutes later, my entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories, photos and mementos, reduced to what I could carry. "The rest is going to Goodwill," Daisy informed me cheerfully, as if she were doing me a favor. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Howard mumbled as he placed my bags on the porch. For a second, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to cry when I went to work. Then Daisy appeared beside him, and his face went blank again. The taxi arrived as the first drops of rain began to fall. I got in without looking back. Not because I was strong, but because I was broken. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Daisy in her window, already redecorating what had been my temporary bedroom. I had $80 in my purse. No job and no home. What I didn't know was that this humiliation would become the fuel for the greatest comeback story of my life. The Sunset Motel on Highway 9 became my home for the next 6 weeks. And let me tell you, it was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. $75 a night for a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and shattered dreams, but it had a roof and a door that locked. After being thrown out like trash, even that felt like a luxury. The older receptionist, Mr. Chester, took pity on me after the first week. "You're not like our usual guests," he said softly, sliding an extra towel across the counter. Most of his clientele were either working construction or hiding from something. I was just hiding from the truth that my own son had cast me aside. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in that narrow bed, forget where I was for a moment, and then reality would hit me like a punch. No grandchildren's laughter, no family breakfast to prepare. Just me and the broken air conditioner, making noises like a dying whale. But that's what Daisy and Howard hadn't counted on. I'm not the kind of woman who stays down. I never have been. When Howard was little and we had nothing, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I cleaned offices at night, worked retail during the day, and took in ironing on the weekends. Survival was nothing new to me. I'd just forgotten how good I was at it. The first thing I did was go to the library every morning. Free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job postings. At 60, nobody was lining up to hire me. But I wasn't looking for handouts, I was looking for an opportunity. "You have accounting experience?" Pearl Davis, the owner of Green Thumb's Garden Center, asked during my 4th job interview that week. She was about my age, had dirt under her fingernails, and a no-nonsense attitude I instantly respected. 20 years, I replied. I handled all the financial management for my late husband's construction company. What I didn't mention was that I'd also spotted at least 3 ways she was losing money just by sitting in her cluttered office for 10 minutes. The inventory system was a mess. She was overpaying suppliers, and her pricing structure hadn't been updated since 2008. The pay isn't much, Pearl warned. $20 an hour part-time. When can I start? That first paycheck was $400, and I treated it like I'd won the lottery. After watching my savings drain away like water through a sieve for 6 weeks, it felt like breathing again after being underwater. The motel room slowly transformed from a temporary stopover to something resembling a home. I bought a small coffee maker, hung my few family photos, and even splurged on a plant for the windowsill. If this was my life now, I would live it with dignity. 3 months later, I made my first real discovery. Pearl was throwing away thousands of dollars worth of plants every year. Anything unsold by the end of the season went straight into the dumpster. That's just how the business works, she explained with a resigned shrug. But I saw something entirely different. I saw potential. You want to do what with the dead plants? Pearl asked, looking at me as if I'd suggested we sell fairy dust and unicorn tears. They're not dead, they're dormant, I explained patiently. And with a little care, most of them can be revived and resold next season. This was the 8th month of my new life, and I'd moved from the motel to a tiny studio apartment above Tony's Pizzeria. The rent was $250 a month, which, after groceries, left me about $100 for everything else, but it was mine. No one could kick me out on a whim or decide I was too set in my ways. Pearl let me take home 3 truckloads of dead plants that November, probably assuming it would teach me a lesson about business realities. What it actually taught me was that I had a gift I'd never known about. My tiny apartment became a greenhouse. Every windowsill, every corner, every available surface was covered with pots and planters. I researched plant care on the library computers, watched YouTube videos, and spent my evenings bringing brown, withered stalks back to life. The neighbors thought I was crazy. Mrs. Schmidt downstairs kept asking if I was running some kind of illegal operation. Too many plants, she'd mumble in broken English whenever she saw me carrying another pot upstairs. But in February, something magical started to happen. Green shoots appeared, buds formed. My studio apartment transformed into a jungle of healthy, thriving plants. I had over 200 specimens, and about 150 of them were not just alive but flourishing. Rose, what in the world? Pearl gasped when I brought the first batch back to the garden center that March. They look better than new. I told you they weren't dead, I said, trying to hide my grin. I was doing cartwheels on the inside. It wasn't just about proving something. It was about discovering I had a talent that could actually make money. Pearl bought every single plant back at half their original retail price. In one transaction, I made $150 more than my first month's salary. But more importantly, I'd found something that felt like purpose again. The next year, our arrangement became official. Pearl set aside all the unsellable plants for me. I would rehabilitate them over the winter, and we'd split the profits in the spring. It wasn't exactly a business empire, but it was mine. Word spread through the gardening community. That lady at Green Thumbs can bring anything back to life, people would say. Soon, other garden centers were calling, asking if I'd take their clearance plants too. By the end of the 2nd year, I was making more from plant rehabilitation than from my accounting job. I'd also moved into a larger apartment with a real balcony, and with Tony's permission, I'd turned his parking lot into an unofficial greenhouse. The best part was, every healthy plant I saved was proof that being cast aside doesn't mean being worthless. Some things just needed the right care, the right attention, and the right person to see their potential. Howard and Daisy had discarded me, assuming I'd wither and disappear. Instead, I put down roots in a soil they could never have imagined. In the 3rd year, I stopped thinking small and started thinking smart. By then, I had a waiting list of garden centers wanting me to rehabilitate their clearance plants, and my little apartment operation was bursting at the seams. The landlord had started charging me extra for excessive plant drainage, and Tony was tired of customers asking if they could buy the beautiful plants covering his parking lot. "You need a proper facility," Pearl said during one of our coffee meetings. "And you need to think bigger than just saving plants." She was right, but thinking bigger required money I didn't have. My savings had grown to about $25,000, which felt like a fortune after starting with nothing. But it wasn't enough for a commercial space. That's when I met May Adams at the Small Business Development Center, SBDC. May was one of those sharp, efficient women who can spot potential a mile away and isn't afraid to make people tap into it. "You're not in the plant rehabilitation business," she told me after reviewing my numbers. "You're in the business of turning waste into profit. That's a whole different conversation." May helped me see what I was too close to notice. I wasn't just saving plants, I was solving a major industry problem. Garden centers were literally throwing away millions of dollars in inventory because they didn't know how to effectively handle end-of-season clearance. "What if you franchised the process?" May suggested. "Teach other people what you do. Take a percentage of their profits and scale the operation nationwide." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Me, a 60-something woman who'd been homeless 3 years prior, running a national company. But the numbers May showed me were impossible to ignore. We spent 6 months developing a business plan. I'd start with a proper facility in Maple Creek, perfect the rehabilitation process, document everything, and then begin licensing the method to other operators across the country. The SBA loan application was 47 pages long, and I almost gave up filling it out 3 times. But May pushed me through each section, helping me articulate why this wasn't just a crazy plant lady's hobby. It was a legitimate solution to a real problem. "Ms. Miller," the loan officer said during my final interview, "your financial projections seem optimistic." "Sir," I retorted, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who'd proven others wrong before. 3 years ago, I was living in a motel room with less than $1,000 in my account. Last year, I turned $80,000 worth of dead plants into $300,000 in revenue. I'd say my track record speaks for itself. The approval for the $250,000 loan came through on a Tuesday in March. I signed the papers in May's office. My hands trembled slightly as I realized I was now responsible for more money than I'd ever imagined. Within 6 months, I'd leased a 5,000 square foot warehouse on the outskirts of town, hired 2 part-time employees, and signed contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. Phoenix Plant Revival, because everything deserves a second chance, was officially born. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had discarded me, assuming I was worthless. Now I was building a business empire based on proving that nothing is ever truly worthless if you know how to see its potential. By the 5th year, Phoenix Plant Revival had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We were operating in 12 states, had licensed operators, and I'd just signed a consulting contract with the regional headquarters of Home Depot. The frightened, broken woman who'd been thrown out with the trash was now being flown to corporate meetings in Los Angeles. "Ms. Miller, your success story is exactly what our industry needs to hear," said Elma Peterson, the sustainability director for Home Depot, as we toured their flagship store. "Turning waste into profit while helping the environment. That's the future of retail." I smiled politely, still getting used to being treated like an expert instead of a nuisance. The transformation hadn't been easy. There were many 18-hour days, failed experiments, and moments I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But every challenge had taught me something new about business, about myself, and about what I was truly capable of. My personal life had stabilized too. I'd moved into a lovely 2-bedroom apartment in the historic district of Maple Creek, complete with a garden where I could test new rehabilitation techniques. I'd found friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. My weekly book club with May and 3 other women had become the highlight of my social calendar. The financial success was astonishing, even to me. Phoenix Plant Revival was pulling in over $3 million in annual revenue, and my personal net worth had topped the 7-figure mark. I kept detailed spreadsheets, not because I was obsessed with money, but because the numbers represented something more important: independence. "Have you considered expanding internationally?" Ralph Stewart, my business lawyer, asked during our quarterly review. We're getting inquiries from Canada and Mexico. One thing at a time, I replied, though the idea was tempting. I want to make sure we do it right before we get too ambitious. The truth was, I was already thinking about the next phase. The plant rehabilitation business had taught me that there were profitable opportunities hidden all around us, if only you knew how to find them. I'd started investing in other small businesses, applying the same principle, finding undervalued potential and helping it grow. But the real satisfaction came from the personal victories, like the day I hired Tom Harris, a 19-year-old who'd been written off by everyone else but possessed an incredible intuition for plant care, or when Pearl Davis, who'd given me my first chance, sold her garden center and became one of my licensed operators in California. You've changed my whole perspective on what's possible, Pearl told me during her farewell party. Watching you build this from nothing. It's inspired half the women in this town to take risks they never would have considered. I'd started keeping a journal of lessons learned, partly for potential future employees, but mostly for myself. The biggest lesson: never let anyone else define your worth. Howard and Daisy had decided I was useless, a burden they couldn't afford. They'd discarded me without a second thought. What they didn't know was they'd just given me the motivation to become everything they never imagined. Every contract signed, every new location opened, every success story was proof that their judgment had been spectacularly wrong. And frankly, I was just getting started. The house hunt began as a practical decision and ended as an act of pure, unadulterated revenge. After 6 years of living in apartments, I needed more space for my expanding business ventures and investment portfolio. What I found instead was the perfect way to tell Maple Creek that Rose Miller was no longer a woman to be simply discarded. The Peterson family estate, June Clark, my realtor, repeated when I mentioned the property. Rose, that house hasn't been on the market for 40 years. It's the most prestigious address in Emerald Hills. Emerald Hills, the neighborhood Howard and Daisy had always dreamed of living in but could never afford. The neighborhood they'd drive through on Sunday afternoons, dreaming of living there someday, while they lived in their modest tract home with the mortgage they'd kicked me out over. Is it for sale? I asked simply. Well, yes, but June hesitated. The asking price is $6.5 million. Let's take a look. The Peterson family estate was everything I expected and more. 12,000 square feet of pristine colonial architecture on a 20-acre manicured property. The master suite with fireplaces, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a chef's kitchen that could feed a small army, and a conservatory that was basically a greenhouse attached to the house. But what really sold me was the view from the master bedroom window. You could see the entire city of Maple Creek, including the modest neighborhood where Howard and Daisy lived, spread out below. Every morning, I could wake up and literally look down on the people who had looked down on me. The sellers are motivated, June explained as we toured the wine cellar. They've already moved to Spain and want a quick close. Cash offer, I said without hesitation. $5.9 million. Close in 2 weeks. June almost dropped her briefcase. Rose, are you sure? That's a huge commitment. I was more than sure. Phoenix Plant Revival was spinning off enough profit to comfort. 6 years prior, I'd been sleeping in a motel room with less than $1,000 in my account. Now I owned the most expensive house in the county. The moving truck arrived the next morning, though frankly, my apartment furniture looked ridiculous in those grand rooms. I'd have to do some serious shopping, but that was a problem I was happy to have. I spent my first evening on the enormous patio at the back of the house, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold over my 20-acre property. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no squabbling neighbors, just peace and space and the deep satisfaction of a goal achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from May. Saw the property transfer in the paper. You wonderful woman. Champagne celebration this weekend. I smiled and typed back, bring the good stuff. Vire toasting new beginnings. What I didn't type but thought was that some beginnings require endings, and I had a feeling the ending of my relationship with Howard and Daisy was about to get very, very interesting. Tomorrow, I start furnishing my new life. Tonight, I would simply enjoy the view from the top. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, exactly 24 hours after the property transfer hit the local paper. I was in my new kitchen, still figuring out which cabinet held the coffee cups, when I heard the familiar two-part chime echo through my marble foyer. On the security monitor, because, yes, my house had a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. I saw them standing on my porch like door-to-door salespeople. Howard looked older, grayer at the temples, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt that screamed overzealous weekend dad. Daisy stood beside him in designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my first month's rent above Tony's. Behind them stood two teenagers I barely recognized. Stella, now 16, had inherited her mother's sharp features, but thankfully, not her cruel eyes. Russell, 14, looked like a taller version of Howard at that age, back when he built blanket forts and brought me dandelions from the yard. I took my time walking to the front door, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. 6 years of silence, and they show up the day after they find out I'm rich. The timing was so perfectly predictable, it was almost comical. Well, well, I said, opening the door but not the screen. Howard, Daisy, children I barely know. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Mom. Howard's voice cracked slightly. We read about the house in the paper. We wanted to congratulate you. How thoughtful. I didn't invite them in. Congratulations delivered. Anything else? Daisy stepped forward with that radiant fake smile I remembered so well. Rose, we know things ended badly between us. We've had time to reflect, and we realize we handled everything wrong 6 years ago. Handled everything wrong, I repeated slowly. Let's call it that. Stella shifted uncomfortably behind her parents. Grandma Rose, Stella said, I barely remember you, but Mom and Dad said you always made great chocolate chip cookies. The girl's innocent remark hit me harder than her parents' rehearsed apologies. She was right. She barely remembered me because they'd stolen 6 years of her childhood from both of us. 6 years of birthdays, school plays, bedtime stories, and grandma-granddaughter moments we'd never get back. I did make good cookies, I said softly, looking at Stella. Then I turned back to her parents, before I was thrown out like trash. Mom, please, Howard pleaded. Can we come in? Can we talk? Talk about what, exactly? Daisy's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the calculating woman beneath. We're family, Rose, and family should stick together, especially when... She gestured vaguely at the mansion behind me. When there's room for everyone. There it was, the true reason for their visit, delivered with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Room for everyone, I sneered. How convenient you've discovered your family feelings now that I have 12,000 square feet. That's not fair, Howard protested, but his eyes were already cataloguing what he could see of the house's interior. We've missed you. The kids have missed having a grandma. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh at the absurdity. Howard, honey, you threw me out of your house with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Daisy told me I was too set in my ways and that my life was no longer your problem. And now you miss me. The silence stretched until Russell spoke. Dad, what is she talking about? Why don't you all come in? I finally said, stepping back from the door. Since you're so interested in family gatherings. I led them through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier and the marble staircase, into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the property. I watched their faces as they took in the silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs, and the artwork that cost more than most people's cars. This place is incredible, Russell breathed, walking toward the windows. Mom, look at the pool. Daisy looked closely. I could practically see her calculating the square footage and property values. It's certainly spacious, she said carefully. Far too big for one person. Is it? I sank into my favorite armchair, a magnificent wingback upholstered in navy velvet, which I'd bought specifically for this room. I find I rather like having room to breathe. Howard perched on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid to wrinkle the fabric. Mom, about what happened 6 years ago. We were under a lot of stress, new mortgage, my job situation was uncertain. Daisy was working full-time with 2 small children. So, naturally, the solution was to make your widowed mother homeless, I finished. Very logical. We thought you'd land on your feet, Daisy said defensively. You're so capable, so independent. We never imagined you'd end up in a motel. I raised an eyebrow. You never imagined it because you never bothered to ask. Stella picked up a family photo from the side table. One of the few pictures I'd kept from my old life. It showed Howard as a little boy, maybe 8 years old, sitting on my lap while I read him a story. Dad, you were really little, she said. That was taken right after your grandfather left, I told her. Your father and I lived alone for 10 years. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I made sure he had everything he needed for school. Drove him to soccer practice every Tuesday and Thursday. I looked directly at Howard. I thought that meant something. It did, Mom, Howard said softly. It means everything. That's why we're here. No, I said firmly. You're here because you want something. The question is, are you going to be honest about what it is, or are we going to continue pretending this is about missed family connections? Daisy's patience was clearly at an end. Fine, she snapped. Yes, we need help. Howard lost his job 3 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage, and Stella needs money for university applications. Satisfied now? Excellent, I said dryly. Now wir getting Summe wäre. The thing is, Howard jumped in, shooting Daisy a warning glance, we figured you have all this space, and we're struggling with our living situation. You want to move in? It wasn't a question. Temporarily. Daisy added quickly. Just until Howard finds a new position. Maybe 6 months, a year at most. I looked around my beautiful, peaceful living room, and then back at the people who had cast me aside when I became inconvenient. We're family, Howard repeated, as if it were a magic word that would open all doors. Family, I sneered. Did you call it that when you locked me out of your house, when you told me my life was no longer your problem? The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Finally, Russell spoke. What happened 6 years ago? Why won't anyone explain what you're talking about? I looked at the 2 teenagers, these grandchildren whose acquaintance had been stolen from me, and made a decision. Sit down, I said to them. Both of you. It's time you learned what kind of people your parents really are. Mom, don't do this, Howard warned. But I raised a hand. Stella, Russell, 6 years ago, your grandfather passed away. I was 60 years old, freshly widowed, and I needed a place to stay while I planned my next steps. Your parents invited me to live with them. I kept my voice calm, factual. For 3 months, I helped with childcare. I contributed my pension checks to household expenses and tried not to be in the way. Stella and Russell listened intently, their faces solemn. Then one morning, your mother decided I was too set in my ways and told me I had to leave immediately. Your father packed my belongings into 2 suitcases and put them on the porch. I had $80 and nowhere to go. That's not how it happened, Daisy protested. You interfered with our parenting decisions, undermined our authority with the children. I made them breakfast, I said simply, and I suggested they say please and thank you. Apparently, that qualified as undermining authority. Russell looked confused. But where did you go? What did you do? I lived in a motel for 6 weeks, then in a studio apartment above a pizzeria. I worked part-time at a garden center for $20 an hour. I smiled at the memory. Actually, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. How can being homeless be the best thing that ever happened to you? Stella asked. Because it taught me I didn't need anyone to take care of me. I could take perfectly good care of myself. I gestured around the room. Better than perfectly good, as it turns out. Daisy grew agitated. That's ancient history, Rose. We're trying to move forward, rebuild our relationship. No, I cut in. You're trying to rebuild your bank account. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and showed them a text I'd received earlier that morning. This is from Lucy Taylor, a friend of mine who works at the Department of Labor. She mentioned a familiar name landed on her desk recently. I looked directly at Howard. You didn't lose your job 3 months ago. You were fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. Howard's face went white. How do you know? I know things, Howard. I know Daisy opened 3 new credit cards last year and maxed them out on designer clothes and spa treatments. I know you refinanced your house twice to pay for that trip to Spain. I know you're not just behind on the mortgage. Foreclosure is set for next month. The silence in the room was deafening. I also know, I continued, that for 6 months after you kicked me out, you drove past my motel every single day. You knew exactly where I was living and how much I was struggling, and you never once stopped to check on me. Stella's eyes filled with tears. Dad, is that true? Howard couldn't look at his daughter. Daisy, on the other hand, had gone into full attack mode. Fine, so we made mistakes. So did you. You could have asked for help instead of disappearing for 6 years. I laughed. Ask for help from the people who told me my life wasn't their problem? From the daughter-in-law who called me a burden. You were young, you were stressed. You were cruel, I said softly. And now you want me to pretend it never happened because you need something from me? Russell suddenly stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's totally messed up, he said, his voice cracking. Dad, you told us Grandma Rose moved to Spain to be near her sister. You said she didn't want to see us anymore. We didn't say exactly that, Howard began. Yes, you did. Stella cried, her voice rising. You said she chose her new life over being part of our family. You made us believe she abandoned us. I felt a wave of satisfaction, mixed with sadness. These children had been lied to for 6 years. Robbed of their grandmother because their parents were too proud to admit what they'd done. There's one more thing you should know, I said softly. About 6 months after I moved out, your father came to see me. Daisy's head snapped to Howard. What? You didn't tell her? I asked Howard, feigning surprise. How interesting. Howard was sweating now. His polo shirt clung to his back. Mom, please. He showed up at my apartment one Tuesday evening, I continued, watching Daisy's face carefully. He'd been drinking, and he was crying. He said he missed me, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he wanted me to come home. You're lying, Daisy said, but her voice was uncertain. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to an old photo. I took a picture of the letter he wrote me that night. Would you like me to read it aloud? The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on legal pad paper. In it, Howard apologized profusely for letting Daisy talk him into kicking me out. He admitted he desperately missed me, that the house was empty without me, that he realized he'd prioritized his wife's comfort over his mother's well-being. But the most damning part was the last paragraph, where he pleaded with me not to tell Daisy about his visit, because she'd already threatened to leave him if he tried to bring me back. He chose her, I said to Daisy calmly. He chose to make her happy instead of doing the right thing for his mother. And for 6 years, he lied to all of you about it. Daisy whirled on Howard, her face a mask of fury. You went behind my back. You wrote her a letter. I was drunk, Howard mumbled. I wasn't thinking straight. No, I said. You were thinking straight for the first time in months. That's what scared you. Stella was openly crying now. 6 years, she whispered. We missed 6 years with you because of their lies. But here's the thing, I said, standing and smoothing my silk blouse. I am not the same woman who was thrown out 6 years ago. That woman was broken, dependent, willing to accept crumbs of affection from people who saw her as a burden. I walked to the window, looking out at my perfectly manicured property. This woman owns a multi-million-dollar company. This woman has friends who respect her, employees who depend on her, and investments that generate more income in a month than your father made in a year, when he still had a job. I turned and faced them. This woman needs nothing from anyone, especially not from people who threw her out like trash and now want to move into her house because they mismanaged their own lives. The silence stretched until Russell spoke, his voice small. So, you don't want a relationship with us? Even now that we know we were lied to? The question broke my heart, but I kept my expression neutral. I want a relationship with you and Stella. You're innocent victims in this situation. But your parents. I looked directly at Howard and Daisy. Your parents will have to earn their way back into my life, if they can. Daisy stood up abruptly. Her mask of fake sweetness was finally shed. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We're their family, Rose. You can't just pick and choose which parts of us you want. Watch me, I retorted calmly. Fine, Daisy continued, her voice rising. You want to play games? You want to punish us for something that happened 6 years ago? We'll just leave. Come on, Howard. Kids, we don't need this. But Stella didn't move, nor did Russell. They sat on my expensive sofa, looking between their parents and me with expressions of confusion and betrayal. Actually, Stella said quietly, I want to stay with Grandma Rose and talk alone. Stella, we're leaving. Daisy commanded. No. Stella's voice was stronger now. I'm 16 years old, and I just found out you lied to me for 6 years about my grandmother. I want to hear her side of the story. Russell nodded. Me too. Daisy looked like she was about to explode, but Howard placed a hand on her arm. Maybe we should give them some space, he said softly. Don't you dare take her side. Daisy hissed at him. I'm not taking anyone's side, Howard retorted, but he looked at me with what might have been regret. I'm trying to think about what's best for our kids. For a moment, I saw a fleeting glimpse of the man who had written me that letter 6 years ago, the son torn between his wife's demands and his conscience. But the moment passed quickly. Fine, Daisy said, but we're not done here, Rose. We'll be back. No, I said firmly. You won't, unless you're invited. This is my house, my property, and I have an excellent security system. If you show up uninvited again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Daisy's face cycled through several shades of red. You can't keep us from our children. I'm not keeping anyone from anyone, I said. But I'm also not allowing you to use them as emotional blackmail. Stella and Russell are welcome any time they want to visit. You and Howard are not. Not until you've proven you've changed. How do we prove it? Howard asked. I considered carefully. Start by telling your children the full truth about what happened 6 years ago. Not your version, not Daisy's version, the truth. Then, get your finances in order without asking me for help. Show me you can stand on your own 2 feet, like the adults you claim to be. And then maybe we can have a conversation about forgiveness. Maybe. I smiled coldly. But don't hold your breath. After they left, I spent 2 hours with Stella and Russell, answering their questions, showing them photo albums from their father's childhood, and listening to their stories about school, friends, and dreams for the future. They were good kids, despite their parents' failings, and I could see echoes of the little boy I'd raised in both of them. Can we come back next weekend? Stella asked as I walked them to the door. Anytime you want, I promised. I have 6 years of grandmothering to catch up on. As I watched their car drive down my long driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. Not revenge precisely, but justice. The people who had cast me aside were now the ones begging for crumbs, while the woman they had discarded lived in a luxury they could never afford. I had proven that being cast aside doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes, it just means you're finally free to discover your true worth. And sometimes, the best revenge really is living well. The next morning, I called May to tell her about the visit. How are you feeling? She asked after I'd recounted the whole story. I looked out at my beautiful property, sipping coffee from expensive china, and smiled. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong finally. Some victories are quiet. This one was perfect. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.